It's Monica Cruz with Breakthrough News here with Laura Salamendra, a recently elected city council member in the city of Geneva, New York, who has been the target of a concerted effort from local right-wing reactionary forces who are pro-police and who have been really pushing forward a campaign of fear and intimidation, attempting to really silence Laura and stop her from pushing forward a progressive platform at the city council to address the issues of police brutality and to push forward policies that will help hold police accountable in that city. Thank you so much for joining us on Breakthrough, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, Monica.
So there's been a lot of talk, a lot of articles released, and statements from local organizations in Geneva about the city council meeting last month on June 7th, where a bunch of right wingers essentially took over the meeting and were able to shut down the meeting, got all up in your face, shouting all of these things while a lot of elected officials were in the room and really just let it happen. Can you talk about what you experienced on that day, June 7th, at the city council meeting in Geneva, New York?
Yeah, so on that night, when I arrived at the meeting, there had been a large group of people outside who had been saying for a while that they were going to shut me down. And so after I sat through the police chiefs, the meeting was to discuss staffing in the police department. And the chief made a lot of claims about what this council had done by passing. Well, he didn't say why, but he said that morale in the city was low and that he couldn't employ officers. He was scared for his staffing levels. And after listening to that, I had some questions about the things that he said. He talked about how much overtime and things. And as a city councilor elected on a police reform platform, I thought it was important to ask those questions. And almost immediately, when I suggested that the council might have time to discuss the information the chief had shared with us, I was immediately screamed down, told to get out of the city. Some of the right wingers were approaching me, grabbing at me. Fellow counselors were joining into the screams to silence me. And the whole time I was looking to the mayor, who is responsible for running the meeting, to do something. And he did not. In fact, he gave the crowd a thumbs up. He went over and apologized that he couldn't do more to silence me. And he ended a meeting, even though there was a quorum. 5 of us wanted to continue because we were elected to do the people's business. And the people's business is to ask tough questions about the police department. When there's a city like ours where so much of our budget goes to accommodate this growing force, we see that other things lack. That means that there's no transportation, there's no food access, um, there's so many things in Geneva, a long history of racism, a long history of neglect of the poor working class folks here. And all of our money instead goes to criminalize those folks. And so this council in Geneva has been asking questions of the police chief, and the city staff and the mayor have been shielding him from those questions. And they allowed for a angry mob to end the public's business that day.
Right. Can you talk about what led up to this, essentially what sounds to me like an all-out attack on the city council meeting in Geneva, New York, and basically some of the forces who have been involved in this campaign to really silence you and to stop the progressive platform that you're putting forward in Geneva?
Um, After the murder of George Floyd, when a group of young activists created this organization, the People's Peaceful Protest, we saw a reaction from the far right. They began organizing against the movement for accountability. And so rather than discuss with us, rather than try to learn about what we're trying to say, about the vision that we have for this community, they have instead threatened us, called us names, harassed us, stalked us, trying to silence us. but the people have stood strong. And so they were coming to that meeting to try to do what they have been trying to do since I was elected, and that is to keep me quiet. They've tried to use ethics complaints, tried to censure me. They've lied about situations I've been out in the community, and these stories erupt about what I was doing. And a majority of the city council time is spent discussing my behavior, my opinions. And so allowing that to happen, allowing such a controversy about me choosing to remain seated during the Pledge of Allegiance has really fueled this flame. The local paper printing that I'm the center of controversy, when in fact my behavior is professional. It is within the guidelines for decorum in a city council meeting. I'm not the one interrupting people, but because they disagree with my opinion and they think I have no right to be there, they think that I should be quiet.
Right. So, as you mentioned in your answer to my first question on what happened that night of the city council meeting last June, you talked about how the mayor was giving a thumbs up to the crowd that was attempting to silence you and shout in your face. What do you make of the actions of the mayor, who's a Democrat, and the other elected officials of the city of Geneva who have really, it seems, just taken the back seat and let this campaign to intimidate and scare you into silence go completely without recourse?
It doesn't surprise me that people who Democrat, Republican, who are not connected to their communities can behave in that way. So because the mayor has ran as a Democrat, and in a small town like this, it doesn't really mean much. He benefits from the power structure that is here. He is unwilling to let it go. And so what we've seen on the council is that there's not really a party line. We have a majority Dem council, six of us, and the mayor and his deputy, Anthony Noon, frequently vote with the two Republicans, almost always. And he has been thinking I'm out of line for so long, and he has been allowed to treat me this way. This isn't the first time that he's allowed me to be silenced. In fact, he does it himself. Often when I'm trying to make motions, he will not hear them. I've taken to strategies like let the record reflect that the mayor is ignoring my motion. He's muted me because of COVID. We've been on Zoom. In sessions with attorneys, in public meetings, he has muted me, a duly elected official. And so it didn't surprise me that day when he allowed the crowd to take over. He has never stood up for my right to be there.
Wow. Well, can you talk about how the people of Geneva took part in the massive anti-racist movement we saw sweep this country? I know Geneva was one of those small cities that had seen this uprising take place and had never seen a movement in the streets like that before. And how do you see your role in the city council and your entire campaign to even get on the council as connected to this movement?
Well, being part of the movement for police accountability, the Black Lives Matter movement here in Geneva last summer was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. It was, I mean, we just went down there and everybody was there in the city. And it started by some young Black organizers calling for a protest to stand with people all over the country. And the city that I'm on the council of released a statement telling people to stay home and to lock their doors because young Black organizers were going to be in the streets demanding justice. Businesses boarded up their windows, writing "All Lives Matter." Business owners with guns went and stood outside of their businesses to protect them from this crowd. And the crowd was, as usual at protest, was beautiful. They were sharing sorrow and joy and dancing and loving each other. And protecting each other, feeding each other. You know, they were working. They were working towards a solution that they could see. And to watch them as an organizer see like this new generation of activists that are demanding change. They took everybody's opinion, everybody spoke, and they formulated these resolutions that they needed to bring to the council floor. And those resolutions included a police accountability board, budget review boards, body camera task force policies. I mean, they were doing real work. And this reactionary group was calling them thugs. And I, as a city councilor, I got into this because we had a struggle here years ago where the poor Black community was poisoned by the city. Well, the city knew about it for 30 years and they didn't tell them. And I remember when that group came to city council and demanded to be heard. They wanted to know why the city had lied to them, why they didn't tell them that they were growing their vegetables in poison and feeding it to their kids. And the city council banged their gavel and silenced them. And the history of Geneva is like that. So many times there's this natural reaction to fight back, and people come together. And if they can't have a chance to be heard. So that day, I decided I was going to run for city council. And so my position there meant that when the PPP, the Peaceful People's Protest, wrote this legislation with the community, I was able to sponsor it, and the majority of it passed. And you know, it was an all-out community effort. Young organizers, experienced legislators, attorneys, all working together to write this legislation, and we were able to bring it to the floor. And the council was so moved, well, some of them, that they passed it. And it was a long process after that to fight about the board among the council. I think that we created a really strong one, and we recently sat it, and they are going to meet next week to start hearing complaints. So for the first time in Geneva, we will know what is happening in the police department.
Wow, I think that's a really amazing victory and something that can really serve as an inspiration, an example to all of the small cities and towns that saw this movement, this anti-racist movement, come to fruition. And the way that you have been able to work with the community to push forward legislation to serve people's needs and get justice and accountability is really incredible and commendable. Can you talk a bit more in detail about the policies that you're pushing forward as a city council member in terms of police accountability and getting justice for the legacy of racism in the city?
Yeah, so the majority of the last year has been spent fighting for this police accountability board, later renamed a police review board. Because of civil service law in New York State, we were up against a challenge about how we could discipline officers, because up until now, basically in Geneva, if you have a police complaint, you go to the police department, and under threats of perjury, you can make a complaint, which then goes to the police chief, who reviews it. And because of the overturning of 50A and the new FOIL opportunities, we've been able to see that so many of those complaints never made it into officers' records. So we haven't really been able to understand in a real, with data, what is going on here. And so now we've created a board of 9 people, some mental health professionals, attorneys, some clergy, and then some working class folks who will now receive the complaint, and they will have subpoena power to investigate the complaint and be able to recommend discipline to this chief. It might surprise a lot of people that the legislating body of a city does not have the power to discipline officers. So this has really exposed for me a place to turn our attention. And that means that communities have to start to rise up and get organized to overturn the Taylor Law, which pretty much insulates police from any kind of community oversight. So because of the system that we work for now, the board will give a recommendation of discipline based on the complaint, and the chief will have to respond why he did not follow that recommendation. So it's bringing transparency, and we will get an idea of what is actually going on here. Because as an organizer, I have an idea of what is going on here, and it's as bad as it is everywhere. And but people are afraid to come out and to say what the police did to them. And we have to create a way for people to be able to talk about what has happened to them. And, this is what the community wanted. And we fought for it, and we're going to keep fighting to make sure that it functions in the way that we need it to. And we hope that this will bring light to what is going on. I mean, we know that we need mental health professionals. We know that we don't need as many police officers. We know the kind of calls that are experiencing in the city. Those people need care, and they don't need jail. And so the community is crying out for this. And so this group is continuing to keep the pressure on. We passed a budget amendment that will look at how the GPD is spending their money. Body camera task force that will go over, make sure that they're, that the community and all of these boards are independent of the police, which was really important for us to fight for, because we need community oversight. And we know what happens when the police start justifying. And so we need to know, the community needs to feel safe. The community needs to feel like they can trust what's happening. And so it was really important as a counselor to the community that we fight for a completely independent board. And we did, and we won.
Now, as I mentioned in my previous comments, Geneva is one of many small cities and many towns across the country and where we're really seeing the past and the future clash in terms of holding police accountable for the way that they treat our communities, for the way that they target Black and Brown and other marginalized communities, particularly working class communities, and how these things are really being struggled out, in the streets, and the way that people are, as you spoke to, fighting to overcome their fear of the police and of the reactionary right wing. And I'm just curious, as a city council member and as an organizer, what do you believe that people around the country in places like Geneva can learn from your experiences in dealing with this concerted effort to scare you into silence and on a larger scale, this backlash to the movement?
I think that people can learn from Geneva and the people's peaceful protest that when you stand up and you fight back and you have each other's backs, that you can win, that you must stay dedicated, you must not compromise. And when you fight for your neighbor in a way like that, when you understand their story, what their life has been like, what has happened to them, the solidarity that you build in your community, you can't turn back from, and it moves people. I know I talked about the mayor being a Democrat, but some of the other counselors were so moved, they had no idea what was happening under their watch. And so we often as organizers are stuck in that spot where we're like, how can we expect people to tell their story when it makes them more vulnerable to the oppression and it's kind of been walking a line. But the way that it happened so organically when people took to the streets after George Floyd's murder, creating that space, having it there, keeping people safe, working to, establish security, just having each other's back in the way that communities naturally do, really will create a movement that can win. And it's hard. I mean, the backlash is hard. But the joy and it outweighs it. And you can really make change.
How can people support your cause from all across the country and all around the world with trying to get accountability for what happened at the last city council meeting and to continue to make sure that you're supported and safe in pushing forward the policies that you were elected to do? How can we support you?
Well, first, I just have to say that I hope that everyone listening will look into a campaign for Chanel Hines, a Black trans woman who was shot by her parole officer nearby in Canandaigua, New York, and to stand up in your own communities because people right where you are need your support. This is happening everywhere, and they need your solidarity. And if you want to stand with me, you can sign the petition, which is, I'm just overwhelmed with the support for so long. I felt, pretty alone because but just in the meetings. And it's really important that we shine a light on what is happening here because in places like Rochester and Buffalo, where women, with politics like mine are winning elections, they're going to face the same things. And we need to stand regionally in the same way Rochester and Geneva stand for police accountability together. We need to share information and how we are fighting back together. So if you can sign the petition at GenevaWomen'sAssembly.org, maybe you could link it. No.
We can do that for sure.
Yeah. I would
Laura
really appreciate it.
Salamendra, thank you so much for joining and speaking out on your story and the incredible work you've been a part of in Geneva, New York. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on Breakthrough.
Appreciate you, Monica. Thank you.